Hi, in this video, I'm going to explain the AP Macroeconomics 2022 first question. And this is set one. So the first question, assume a country's economy is operating below full employment. And then we need to draw the graph to explain the situation. So let me show you how to draw the graph. So you always need to start the graph with the y-axis and the x-axis. So the y-axis is the price level, P, and then the x-axis, the output or the real GDP. And we have a downward sloping aggregate demand curve, and we have a upward sloping short non-aggregate supply curve. Okay, but then it says that the economy is operating below full employment. So that's the point. So then how can we draw the long run aggregate supply curve? So the long run aggregate supply curve should be here. Okay. And here's the long run aggregate supply curve. So then the current output is below the full employment output. And then the question says that the current equilibrium real output and the price level, we denote here, this is a Y1, this is a Y1, and this is a P1. And then the full employment output, the label the YF, and here's a YF. And we call it the potential GDP, okay? That's the first question. It's straightforward. Now, the question number B, identify one fiscal policy action that country governments can take to restore full employment. So in general, the governments, they cannot touch the aggregate supply curve. So they cannot shift this long non-aggregate supply curve. They cannot shift this short non-aggregate supply curve. What they can do is they can stimulate the demand side and they can shift this aggregate demand curve. So what they can do is that they implement expansionary fiscal policy, such as they raise government spending or they lower the tax. Then they can shift this aggregate demand curve to the right, shift this aggregate demand curve to the right like this. So then this is, let me call it the AD2, okay? So one fiscal policy action, you can either say that raising the government spending or lowering the tax, reducing the tax, okay? So that's the question number B's answer. Now, let's go to the question number C. Assume instead that no fiscal policy action is taken. So that being said, government, they don't do anything. They cannot touch the tax. They cannot touch the government. No, they don't touch the tax and they don't touch the government spending. But here, suppose a change in investment spending causes the real GDP to increase by $200 billion. So again, it's the same situation, but not by the government, but by the companies. So investors, they spend more than before. So the GDP increased by the $200 billion. And calculate the minimum change in investment spending that could have caused this increase in real GDP. Well, this is a kind of tricky question. So you probably don't know the formula if you just memorize the formula. Well, government spending multiplier or the government purchase multiplier is a 1 over 1 minus MPC. That's what you memorize. And government tax multiplier, where you simply call it the tax multiplier, which is a negative MPC over 1 minus MPC. But we don't talk about, we usually don't talk about the investment spending. But in this question, let me show you the step-by-step how to come up with the formula. So you start with the aggregate demand equation, which is the following. Y equals consumption plus investment plus government spending. And then the consumption is same as the MPC times the disposable income, and the disposable income is a Y minus T, and plus investment plus government spending. And then let me arrange this equation. So let me shift this to MPC times Y to the left-hand side. Then I have a 1 minus MPC times Y. And then the right-hand side, I have a negative MPC times a T plus investment plus government spending. Then let me divide it by 1 minus MPC both sides. Then I have a Y equals negative MPC over 1 minus MPC times T plus 1 over 1 minus MPC investment plus 1 over 1 minus MPC times the G, government spending. Then I can put the delta in front of the variable. So that captures difference today and last year. Or you can say that this quarter and the last quarter. So then I can come up with this formula. Delta Y equals negative MPC over 1 minus MPC times the delta T plus 1 over 1 minus MPC times the delta I plus 1 over 1 minus MPC times the delta G. Well, then you get to know this is a formula that you're using. This is a tax multiplier and this is a government purchase multiplier. Now we have this term, okay? That's how we derive the formula. And the reason that I don't put the delta in front of the MPC because the MPC is just constant, it's not a variable. Now let's try to figure it out, the MPC. But then the question does not let you know the MPC, they let you know the MPS, marginal propensity to save, is a 0.25. So that being said, MPS, so MPS is a 0.25. Well, as a consumer, you have the two options. One is you spend and the other one is you save. That means the MPS plus MPC always equal to 1. That being said, the MPC, marginal propensity to consume, equals to 0.75. Then we almost done. So because the government, they don't touch the tax and they don't touch the government spending, this question lets you know, well, the real GDP increased by the $200 billion. So the left-hand side, delta Y is a $200 billion. And then the right-hand side, we have a 1 over 1 minus MPC. We just found the MPC is a 0.75. And then we want to know that this unknown, delta I. So what's the delta I? Well, this 1 over 0.25 times delta I, then this 1 over 0.25 is just 4 times delta I. From there, you get to know, okay, delta I is a $50 billion. Okay, that's the answer. So it was a little bit tricky because usually students memorize this tax multiplier and the government spending multiplier. They didn't have a chance to play with this one, then you don't know how to solve the question. But this question, I explained the fully detailed version of the formula and how to derive it and how to use it. Now, let's go to the question number D. Assume the output gap was initially $800 billion. On your graph in part A, show the shown effects of the change in investment spending identified in part C. So that means that if you didn't solve the question properly, the A and C, then you cannot find the right answer for the question number D. So you need to be very careful when you solve the question. So if you made a mistake, then automatically the following questions, you cannot get the right answer. So let me copy and paste this graph, and then we're gonna reuse it. So let me copy and paste here. I need a space. Also, let me make a small little bit. All right. So given that the question, it says that the gap is $800 billion. So between the Y1 and YF, that is $800 billion gap. Okay. So this difference from here and there is $800 billion. Let me denote this way. YF minus Y1 is actually the $800 billion. But then from the question number C, the investment is increased. That's why the GDP increased by the $200 billion. That means we need to shift this AD curve to the right, but it's not that much. So it's only the $200 billion, right? So this is AD2. And then as a result, we have the Y2. And then you get to know the difference between the Y2 and YF. So YF minus Y2 is now $600 billion. So we still, the current output is less than the YF, right? So here we need to denote that this is a Y2 and this is a price level P2. Okay? So that's the answer for D. Now let's go to the question number E. Given your answer to part D, is the actual rate of the unemployment greater than, less than, or equal to natural rate of the unemployment? Well, from the graph, YF captures the natural rate of the unemployment. Let me denote the UF, okay? But still, our current output is less than the YF, so that means that Y2 is less than YF. That means unemployment, when we are producing the output Y2, let me denote the Y2, which is a greater than YF. Does it make sense? Well, in general, output is low, that means you have a less worker, right? You hire the less workers, that means that you have the high unemployment. And we call it Okun's law. So the inverse relationship between the output and unemployment. Unemployment rate is high, then it means that there are less workers you hire. That means that output is low, right? So that's the answer for E. Again, the unemployment rate is a greater than natural rate of the unemployment. Okay? Now the question number F. So question number F. Assume that private savings now increase. So private saving increases. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the loan over funds market and to show the effect of the increase in private saving on the real interest rate. So the loan over funds market, the x-axis the quantity of the loan over funds, and the y-axis the real interest rate. So you need to be very careful. The y-axis is not the nominal interest rate. It is a real interest rate. So we have a downward sloping demand curve of the loan over funds, and then we have the upward sloping supply curve of the loan over funds. The reason that we have a downward sloping loan over funds is following. When the interest rate is high, there are not that many people who wants to borrow the money to start a business, to start a new project, or to buy a house, okay? On the other hand, the real interest rate is low, then there are high demand. So there are so many people who wants to borrow the money to start a new project, new business. On the other hand, supply of the loan over fund is upward sloping. Why is that? When you get more interest rate, then you want to save more, then your saving becomes a supply of the loan over funds. So from there, you can find the answer. Because the private saving is increased, then the supply of the loan over funds is increased. That being said, we need to shift the supply curve of the loan over fund to the right, like this. So let me denote the S2. Okay. Then what happened? Interest rate was R1, but now we have a R2. Okay, so interest rate is decreased. Real interest rate is decreased when the private saving is increased. That's the answer. Now let's go to the last question, G. Based solely on the change in real interest rate shown in part F. Again, if you mess up the question number F, you cannot find the answer for G. So we found the real interest rate is increased. Then what will happen to each of the following? So the first one, what happened to the real GDP in the shown one? And then what happened to the long run aggregate supply curve? Well, the first one, real GDP will be increased. Why is that? Well, because when you have the lower interest rate, investment is increased, then the output goes up. That's why the real GDP will be increased in the shown run. Okay. And what happened to the long run aggregate supply curve? When you have the lower interest rate, that means that you have the cost of the borrowing has decreased, means that you can spend more, than in the end, you're going to have the loss of the investment, and that means that you have a more capital. That being said, the long run aggregate supply curve shift to the right. Okay, so long run aggregate supply curve shift to the right, or you can say that long run aggregate supply will be increased. Okay, that's it.